I was 48 years old, and after 2 decades serving at Naval Station Norfolk, I thought I knew every secret an engine room could hold. But you never expect to find an altar to a forgotten god welded directly to the hull of your own destroyer. It was a box, sealed and silent, made of a metal we couldn't even identify, and it felt ancient, wrong. When the specialists from Naval Intelligence finally arrived and managed to pry it open, their faces went white. One of them just looked at his superior and whispered, "This is impossible." Would you have the courage to touch something like that? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and tell us which city or country you're watching from. The truth of what was inside that box is more terrifying than you can imagine. My name is Commander Elias Vance, Eli to the few who call me by my first name. I'm 48 years old, and for more than half my life, my world has been the steady, thrumming heart of a U.S. Navy destroyer. Naval Station Norfolk has been my home port for so long that the scent of salt and diesel fuel feels more natural to me than fresh-cut grass. My life is one of routine, of schematics and systems, of predictable outcomes based on sound engineering. I believe in logic, in the tangible reality of steel and steam. On the USS Loanoke, I knew every pipe, every valve, every circuit breaker by heart. She was a living thing to me, and as her chief engineer, I was her keeper. And on that Tuesday, I was preparing to say goodbye. The day started like any other, only quieter. The Roanoke was cold ironed, docked and silent, awaiting her final voyage to the scrapyard. Decommissioning a ship is like a slow, respectful funeral. You walk the empty corridors, the silent mess decks, and you perform the final rites. My job was the last systems check, a final inventory to ensure everything was properly shut down and documented. It was a melancholy task, a ghost walk through a place that once pulsed with the energy of 200 sailors. I had Petty Officer Henry Parker with me, a good kid, barely 25, who saw the ship as just a stepping stone in his career. To me, she was a legacy. We were in the aft engine room, a cavern of dormant machinery. The air was still and heavy with the smell of hydraulic fluid and old paint. My footsteps echoed in a way they never did when the turbines were spinning. "Everything looks good, Commander," Henry said, his voice bouncing off the bulkheads. "Pressure 0 across the board, all valves tagged out." I nodded, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, playing over the massive reduction gears and the silent generators. It was a place of immense power, now sleeping. But my routine, my deep-seated instinct, told me to check one last time. There was a small bilge space beneath the port-side propeller shaft, a cramped, miserable hole that nobody ever went into unless a pump failed. It was the ship's appendix, useless, forgotten, and a potential source of trouble. "I'm just going to take a look under the shaft alley," I told him. "You can head up and start on the forward engine room logs." Henry gave me a quick, "Aye, Commander," and his footsteps faded away, leaving me in total silence. I pulled open the heavy steel hatch, and the smell of stale, oily water hit me. This was the gut of the ship. I clicked on my headlamp, its beam adding to the one from my handheld light, and I began to lower myself in. It was a tight squeeze, the kind of space that makes you acutely aware of every bolt and pipe pressing against you. The only sound was my own breathing and the soft scrape of my boots on the ladder. Down in the bilge, the ship's hum was gone. It was replaced by an unnerving quiet, a deadness to the air that felt wrong. The low, constant vibration that had been the soundtrack to my life for 20 years was absent. It was in this profound silence that I first noticed it. It wasn't a sound or a smell. It was a reflection. As I swept my light across the inner hull, a section of the curved steel didn't reflect the beam back. It seemed to drink it. The light hit it and just stopped, creating a patch of perfect, non-reflective darkness. I frowned. That wasn't right. The entire bilge should be coated in the same gray, corrosion-resistant paint. I shuffled closer. my boots sloshing in a shallow puddle of condensation. The air grew colder as I approached the spot. Not just a little cooler, but a deep, penetrating cold, the kind that feels like it's leaching the heat from your bones. I reached out a gloved hand, my light fixed on the area. My fingers touched the hull, and I felt the familiar curve of the ship's plating. But then, my hand moved over the strange section. It was perfectly flat, and the cold was intense, like touching a block of dry ice. I traced the edges with my light. It was a seam. A perfect, razor-thin seam forming a square about 3 feet across. This wasn't a patch. I've seen hundreds of hull repairs in my career. They're ugly, functional things with thick, obvious welds. This was different. The weld was so fine, so precise, it looked more like a drawing than a piece of metalwork. It was ancient, yet more advanced than anything our shipwrights could do. My heart started a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. This wasn't on any blueprint. I knew the side Roanoke's design schematics better than the layout of my own house. There was no access panel here, no storage locker, no structural component that matched this. It was a solid lead-gray box, fused directly into the very skeleton of my ship, and it had no business being there. It felt like finding a brick wall in the middle of your living room that no one else in your family remembers building. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A piece of classified sensor equipment from the Cold War. A counterweight installed after a refit that somehow never made it into the records. But none of it fit. The craftsmanship was too old, the material was alien, and the sheer impossibility of its placement defied every naval engineering principle I'd ever learned. I stood there in the dark, in the cold, silent gut of the ship, staring at something that couldn't exist. The engineer in me saw a problem, a dangerous structural anomaly. But the man in me felt something else. A deep, primal sense of dread. It felt like I had stumbled upon a tomb, a secret that had been deliberately buried in the heart of the machine. My first instinct was to call the captain, to report it, and let the system handle it. But another part of me, a more curious, more reckless part, wanted to know more. To find a way, to see what was inside. What would you have done, in that moment? Would you have had the courage to investigate, to risk your career, and maybe more for a truth that was never meant to be found? Let me know your honest answer in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe and tell us which city or country you're tuning in from. The decision I made in that bilge set in motion a chain of events that would shatter everything I thought I knew about the Navy and about the world itself. My mind, trained for 2 decades to diagnose and solve, immediately started cycling through possibilities. My first thought was practical, logical, a counterweight. Maybe after a refit, the ship's balance was off, and some shipyard crew in a hurry installed a custom ballast block and never documented it. It was sloppy, but plausible. Or maybe it was something more clandestine. A piece of forgotten Cold War technology, a passive listening device, or a magnetic anomaly generator designed to give us a ghost signature. The Navy has secrets older than I am. But the more I looked, the less those explanations made sense. The craftsmanship was too fine, the placement too integral. This wasn't an addition. It felt like it had been here first, and the ship had been built around it. I knelt, the cold from the deck seeping through my coveralls. I took off a glove and pressed my bare palm against the box's surface. The cold was shocking. It wasn't the passive cold of unheated metal. It was an active, hungry cold that felt like it was pulling the warmth directly from my hand. I snatched it back, my skin tingling and numb. Around the box, there was a strange and total silence. The distant hum of a ventilation fan, the creak of the ship settling at her moorings, sounds that should have been carried through the steel hull, were simply gone in this one spot. It was like the box was a hole in the ship's acoustic reality, I ran my fingers along the weld again. It was smoother than a baby's skin, without a single burr or imperfection. No human hand with a welding torch could create such a seam. It looked like two pieces of clay that had been perfectly, seamlessly joined while they were still wet. My curiosity started to sharpen into a professional imperative. I had to identify this. I unclipped my multi-tool from my belt and unfolded the small steel file. I pressed it against a corner of the box and scraped. Nothing. I put more pressure on it, my knuckles white. The file screeched, a high, thin sound that was immediately swallowed by the silence. I pulled it away and shone my light on the spot. The file was blunted, its metal teeth ground down, but the surface of the box was untouched. Not a scratch. Not even a smudge. My heart hammered a little faster. Whatever this was, it was harder than tempered steel. Okay. New approach. I pulled a small, powerful magnet from my diagnostic kit, one we use to check for magnetization in turbine blades. I held it near the box. There was no pull, no resistance. It was completely inert, as if the box wasn't made of metal at all, but some kind of dense, cold stone. I tapped it with the handle of my multi-tool. The sound was wrong. Instead of the sharp ring you'd expect from a hollow metal container, or the solid thud of a block of steel, there was just a dull, flat thump. The sound died the instant it was made, completely absorbed by the surface. It was like knocking on a wall of solid rubber, but I felt, that this thing was immensely dense. This was the point where the engineer in me began to lose the argument with the officer. The engineer wanted to get a drill, a cutting torch, to violate every regulation in the book to see what was inside. But the officer, the commander responsible for this vessel and its crew, even a skeleton crew, knew I was dancing on the edge of a cliff. Hull integrity is sacred. Unauthorized modification is a court-martial offense, and drilling into a completely unknown object that defies basic physics, that was just a special kind of stupid. I was out of my depth, and I knew it. There was one last thing I could try. A non-invasive test. In my main toolkit, stowed in the engine control room, was a portable XRF spectrometer, a handheld scanner that could analyze the elemental composition of any material. It was our go-to for identifying metal fatigue or contamination. I scrambled back up the ladder, my movements clumsy with haste. The normal air of the engine room felt warm, the familiar hums and echoes a comfort after the dead zone below. I grabbed the scanner, a heavy, pistol-shaped device, and returned to the bilge. My hands were shaking slightly as I keyed it on. I held the sensor against the cold gray surface. The device whirred, its small screen lighting up as it bombarded the material with X-rays and analyzed the resulting fluorescence. I expected to see a complex alloy, maybe something with tungsten or iridium, something exotic but explainable. The screen flickered. A jumble of letters and numbers appeared, a chaotic stream of data that made no sense. The analysis graph, which should have shown clean peaks for different elements, was a flat line of pure static. Then, a single error message blinked on the screen. Sample, non-identifiable, out of spectrum. The machine, designed to identify every known element and alloy on the planet, was telling me that the thing I was touching didn't register. It wasn't just unknown. It was unknowable. That was it. That was the moment my world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't a piece of forgotten naval hardware. This was something else. Something alien. Not necessarily from another planet, but alien to every law of engineering and materials science I had ever learned. I backed away from it slowly, my flashlight beam still fixed on its flat, dark face. It just sat there, silent and cold, a perfect impossibility in the heart of my ship. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to get out, to seal the hatch and pretend I had never seen it. But I couldn't. I was a commander in the United States Navy. My duty was to report. I climbed out of the bilge for the last time, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. I secured the hatch, the heavy clang of the steel echoing in the engine room. It sounded final. I walked over to the bulkhead phone, my boots heavy as lead. I picked up the receiver and dialed the bridge. "This is Commander Vance," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Get me the captain." There was a pause. "Right away, Commander." While I waited, I stared back at the hatch I'd just closed. I had found something else down there, tucked into a small crevice between the box and the hull. It was a small, tarnished ring of the same unidentifiable metal. It wasn't attached to anything. It just sat there, waiting. It looked like the pull ring for a pin, the kind you'd find on a fire extinguisher or a grenade. A manual release. It was the only part of the entire object that seemed designed to be touched by a human hand. The temptation to go back down, to just slide a finger through that ring and pull it, was immense. Would you have the courage to pull it, knowing it could be the key or it could be the end? Let me know. And if you want to know what the captain said and who he called next, make sure you subscribe, because our quiet decommissioning was about to become a national security event. Captain Davies arrived in the engine room in less than 5 minutes. He was a good man, a surface warfare officer to his core, who saw the ship as a weapon system. To him, the engines were just the part that made the weapon move. But when I showed him the thermal imaging of the bilge, a perfect ice-cold square glowing black against the ambient heat of the hull, the color drained from his face. He didn't need to be an engineer to understand that he was looking at something that broke the laws of thermodynamics. He made one call, not to Fleet Command, but to a number I didn't recognize. His words were few and clipped. "Vance found something in the Asterix Roanoke." "No, sir. It's anomalous. You need to see this." After that, the world I knew ceased to exist. Within the hour, the pier was swarming, not with Navy police, but with quiet men in civilian clothes, with sidearms holstered discreetly under their jackets. They established a perimeter. The decommissioning was halted. My skeleton crew was confined to quarters, their phones confiscated. The USS Roanoke, a ship on its way to the scrapyard, was suddenly the most secure asset in Naval Station Norfolk. I was told to remain in the engine room. I was no longer its master. I was its warden, guarding a prisoner I didn't understand. They arrived 6 hours later, not by boat or truck, but by a silent, unmarked helicopter that landed on the flight deck after dark. There were 4 of them. They weren't sailors or engineers. They moved with the quiet, predatory efficiency of men who operate in places that don't appear on maps. Their leader, a severe-looking man with pale eyes who introduced himself only as Shaw, looked at me as if I were a malfunctioning piece of equipment. He didn't care about my rank or my 2 decades of service. He just pointed toward the bilge hatch. "Show us," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of curiosity or alarm. It was the voice of a man who had seen impossible things before. They sealed off my engine room, my home, with heavy magnetic sheets that blocked all signals. They set up their own lighting, casting the familiar space in a sterile, white glare. I was allowed to stay, but I was instructed not to speak unless spoken to, and not to touch anything. I stood in the corner of a space I knew better than my own skin and watched as strangers prepared to perform surgery on its heart. For 2 days, they worked. The equipment they brought in was unlike anything in the Navy's inventory. There were sonic imagers that hummed at a frequency that made my teeth ache, and spectrometers that seemed to be sampling the air itself. They lowered a fiber optic camera no thicker than a wire along the weld seam, its lens glowing with a faint blue light. On their monitors, I saw images of the box's internal structure, a complex, honeycomb lattice that defied any known manufacturing process. It was as if it had been grown, not built. They spoke in a low murmur, using acronyms and terminology that were completely alien to me. They never seemed frustrated or surprised, only methodical. It was the most unnerving thing I had ever witnessed. They were dissecting a ghost, and they were doing it with the calm precision of a bomb squad. On the second day, Shaw approached me. He held up a tablet showing a 3D rendering of the box. "Commander," he said, his pale eyes fixing on me. "In your professional opinion, was this object part of the ship's original construction?" I swallowed. "No, sir. Impossible. The hull plates are bent and welded around it. It's as if it was the first piece laid down, and the whole ship was built around it." He just nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed the worst possible answer. That's what we were afraid of. Finally, the decision was made. They were going to open it. They didn't use a drill or a saw. They brought in a device that looked like a high-tech projector. It fired a single hair-thin beam of pure white light at one of the box's seams. There was no sound, no smoke, no shower of sparks you'd expect from a plasma cutter. The beam just touched the metal, and the metal vanished. It was unmade. Inch by inch, they traced a perfect square on the surface. The silence was absolute, the air thick, with a tension that felt electric. When the cut was complete, one of the specialists used a powerful magnetic lifter to pull the panel away. It came free with a soft sigh, the only sound in the dead space. They aimed their lights inside, and the sterile glare illuminated the contents. There was no explosion, no gas, no ancient evil unleashed. There was only order. Inside, suspended in a thick, perfectly clear gelatinous substance that didn't even quiver, were two objects. One was a series of rolled sheets of what looked like vellum, tied with a simple leather cord. The other was a device of breathtaking complexity, a symphony of brass, copper, and glass, all interlocking gears and delicate wiring that seemed to pulse with a soft internal light. One of the younger specialists, a woman with trembling hands, brought a sensor near the gel. "No biologicals, no degradation. It's in perfect stasis," she whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. Shaw leaned closer, his gaze fixed on the clockwork device. "Get a scan of that core." Another specialist aimed a handheld unit at the center of the machine, where a piece of faceted, dark glass glowed faintly. The reading appeared on his screen. He stared at it, his mouth slightly open. "Shaw, the energy signature. It's not chemical. It's not nuclear. It's quantum. A stable zero-point field." Shaw didn't look away from the device. "It's a Babbage engine," he breathed, the words hanging in the cold air like ghosts. "A mechanical computer. From the 1800s. He then carefully reached in with a pair of long tongs and lifted out the vellum scrolls. He unrolled the first one on a portable table. The drawing on it was executed with the meticulous, beautiful precision of a 19th century draftsman. But what it depicted was impossible. It was a schematic for a propulsion system based on localized gravity distortion, a drive that could fold space. And in the bottom right corner, in elegant cursive script, were a date and a signature. 1851, Isambard Kingdom Brunel. The greatest shipbuilder of his age. The unspoken truth slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. This ship, my modern billion-dollar destroyer, and maybe every ship in the fleet, was a shell. A high-tech cage built around a piece of impossible Victorian-era technology that wasn't supposed to exist. We hadn't invented it, we had found it. And we had been hiding it in plain sight for decades. What do you do when you learn that the very foundation of your world is a lie? Would you have the courage to expose it? Even if it meant destroying everything you've ever believed in? Let me know, and make sure you subscribe. Because the orders I received next would make me question not just my duty, but my own sanity. Shaw didn't celebrate his discovery. He didn't marvel at it. He simply looked at the impossible artifact and the 19th century schematics for a faster-than-light drive, as if they were inconvenient pieces of evidence at a crime scene. His team moved with a chilling, silent efficiency that was more terrifying than any shouted order. They didn't document what they found. They contained it. The vellum scrolls were carefully rolled and sealed in an airtight tube. The glowing, clockwork heart of the device was submerged in a new container of that strange, inert gel. The metal panel they had cut from the box, and the box itself, were methodically vaporized with the same silent, light-based weapon they'd used to open it, leaving not even a scorch mark on the hull, only fresh, bare steel where the anomaly had been. It was an erasure. They were wiping a fact from existence. Within an hour, they were gone. All their equipment was packed into sterile, featureless cases and loaded back onto the unmarked helicopter. Before he left, Shaw stood before me in the now brightly lit, strangely empty-feeling engine room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His pale eyes were like chips of ice. "Commander Vance," he began, his tone perfectly flat, "your official report will state that you discovered a non-critical structural anomaly during your final inspection, likely a manufacturing flaw from the shipyard. Your diligence prevented a potential issue during the scrapping process. You will be commended for your vigilance." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The Office of Naval Intelligence will handle the follow-up with the contractor. As far as you're concerned, your involvement is over. This conversation, this team, and the contents of that anomaly never existed. Am I understood?" It wasn't a question. It was a command etched in stone. I was a commander in the United States Navy. I had sworn an oath. I looked at this man, who held no official rank I could recognize, and I understood that he represented a power far beyond any admiral. I just nodded. Understood. He gave a curt nod in return, and turned, his footsteps echoing as he walked out of my engine room for the last time. I was left alone in the silence, standing on the spot where the impossible had briefly existed. The air was no longer cold there. The pocket of dead silence was gone. The ship felt normal again, and that was the most horrifying thing of all. The next morning, the official orders came down. The USS Roanoke's decommissioning schedule was canceled. It was being redesignated for expedited materials reclamation at a secure, private shipyard in Pascagoula. Not the usual boneyard in Philadelphia. This was different. This was a burial. My skeleton crew was reassigned with bewildering speed, scattered across the fleet. I was given a new billet, a shore-duty assignment at a training command, reviewing engineering curricula. They weren't punishing me. They were promoting me into a cage. A quiet, comfortable office where I could never again get my hands on the guts of a warship, where I could never stumble upon another secret buried in the steel. I stood on Pier 12 2 days later and watched as the tugboats guided the Roanoke out of her berth for the final time. She looked proud, her gray hull cutting through the calm waters of the Elizabeth River. But I knew she was a dead ship walking. She wasn't being retired with honor. She was being taken to an undisclosed location to have her deepest secrets surgically removed and melted down into nothing. As she slipped past the channel markers and headed for the open sea, I felt a profound sense of loss, not just for the ship, but for the truth she was carrying to her grave. I was the only person left in the world who knew what she really was. That was 6 months ago. Now I sit in my climate-controlled office, surrounded by schematics of propulsion systems that I know are, at best, a partial truth. I look out my window at Naval Station Norfolk, the largest naval base in the world. I see the sleek, powerful hulls of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the massive flight decks of the new Ford-class carriers. They are the pinnacle of our power, the symbols of our technological supremacy. And I can't look at them without feeling a cold dread creep up my spine. I don't see warships anymore. I see shells. I see beautiful, complex billion-dollar cages built around a secret that we stole, or found, or were given over a century and a half ago. I can't stop thinking about that box. Was it a time capsule left by a forgotten genius like Brunel, who discovered a principle of physics we're not supposed to know yet? Or was he not the inventor at all? Was he just the first one to find it? A piece of technology from somewhere else? A gift? Or a wreck? Every time a new ship is commissioned, I wonder if a team of quiet men in the dead of night welds another one of those cold, silent boxes into its heart. Is our entire fleet, the foundation of our global power, running on a lie? Is every chief engineer in the Navy just a warden for a prisoner they don't even know they're guarding? They told me to forget, but I can't. The real question, the one that keeps me awake at night, isn't where the technology came from. It's about the device itself. It was dormant, stable, but it was a machine. And machines are built to be turned on. What happens when one of those secrets, buried in the belly of a destroyer in the South China Sea, or an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, finally decides to wake up? And you, what do you think was really behind it all? A lost chapter of human invention, or the first hint of something far older? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The truth is out there, and if you want to continue searching for it with me, don't forget to subscribe. You never know what secrets are waiting to be uncovered.